Hi guys, and welcome back to the next video on my channel. Now, as promised, this week's video is another serial killer profile, and we're going to look at the dating game killer, or Rodney Alcala. I'm really surprised I had not heard of this case before. It's absolutely horrendous and it's really frustrating, and you'll see what I mean when I say it's frustrating as the more we move on in this case, from the fact that some of these killings could have been prevented all the way up to the court cases. But like I say, we'll touch up more on that as we go on throughout the case. I only heard about this case when a friend had suggested it to me as a potential video a few weeks ago, and like I say, I was so surprised that I'd never heard of it before. It was the 13th of September 1978, and The Bachelorette, on the episode of the dating game that was airing, Cheryl Bradshaw, shows Bachelor number 1, Rodney Alcala. Here's a clip from that particular episode, especially interactions between Cheryl and Rodney. It's a little bit cringy, but it's really eerie watching, knowing that he had killed and he would go on to kill again.
And we're going to start by having them say hello to you and see how they sound. Number 1, would you say hello to Cheryl, please?
We're going to have a great time together, Cheryl.
Okay, and here we go.
Bachelor number 1.
Yes?
What's your best time?
The best time is at nighttime,
Why do you say that?
because that's the only time there is.
The only time? What's wrong with morning, afternoon?
Well, they're okay, but nighttime's when it really gets good. Then you're really ready.
I'm a drama teacher, and I'm going to audition each of you for my private class. Bachelor number 1. You're a dirty old man. Take it.
Oh, come on, over here.
Rodney would later claim that he had killed 50 to 100 people during his murder spree. But what was not known to the studio audience, Cheryl herself, or the team at the dating game was that Rodney had a previous conviction. And this was for the rape of an 8-year-old girl who barely survived her attack. She was only saved when a passerby saw her getting into Rodney's car and called to report a potential abduction. When the police arrived at Rodney's apartment, the girl was that severely beaten that they thought that she was dead, and Rodney used this as his chance to escape. The girl was found lying in a pool of her own blood and was barely clinging on to life. She had been beaten severely with a steel bar. Her name was Tali Shapiro, and she would later go on to testify many years later. However, in the original case, her family moved back to Mexico, and so she couldn't testify against Rodney, and so he was only served 3 years for abduction and not for the rape and attempted murder. As soon as they got backstage, Cheryl knew that something was wrong with Rodney. He was acting very creepy, he was making creepy comments, and she just got a feeling that something wasn't right, and so she cancelled their date that was supposed to be a tennis lesson. Another bachelor on the programme also said that Rodney was acting very creepy and very weird, and they got a bad feeling from him. What Cheryl didn't know until years later was that she had actually saved her own life, and her own intuition had prevented her from being one of Rodney's victims. During the investigation after the rape and attempted murder of Tali Shapiro, police actually found hundreds of images of women and young girls in Rodney's apartment. But just who was Rodney Alcala? He was born in San Antonio, Texas in 1943, and when he was 8 years old, his father moved him and the rest of his family to Mexico. However, 3 years after this move, the father abandoned the family, and so his mother moved the family to Los Angeles. At 17 years old, he served in the army as a clerk. However, he was medically discharged after a mental breakdown. And not long after this, he was diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, and showing traits of being a psychopath and sexual sadism. He had an IQ of 135 and went on to study at UCLA School of Arts. Now on the FBI's most wanted list, he used the alias John Berger to enroll in film school at New York University. He came across as quite a typical student, liked to think of himself as a ladies' man. However, sometimes in his spare time he would pose as an amateur photographer and lure in men and women for photo shoots. He was also a regular attendee at singles clubs in the area. During the summer months, he worked at an all-girls camp teaching art. However, it was during one of these months working at the school in the summer of 1971, the two girls attending the camp recognized Rodney from the wanted posters, and he was subsequently arrested. However, as we mentioned earlier, he only served 3 years in prison, and he used his charm to charm a parole board. Only 8 weeks after his release, he was arrested and sent to prison for a further 2 years for breaking his probation. He was accused of attacking a 13-year-old girl, providing her with marijuana, and she also told the police that she had been kidnapped. However, he was never done for the kidnapping charge. In 1997, after his second release, for some reason, and this is where it starts to get really frustrating, so bear with me, his parole officer at the time allowed Alcala, a repeat offender and a flight risk, to travel to New York. Within a week of arriving in Manhattan, NYPD cold case detectives now believe that he killed 23-year-old Ellen Jane Hover, who was the daughter of popular Hollywood nightclub owner Cyrus and the goddaughter of Sammy Davis Jr. and Dean Martin. Her remains were found buried in the Rockefeller estate at Westchester County. Ellen had actually put a man's name in her date book, John Berger, and as we know, this was the alias that Alcala was using when he was on the run the first time. He had told her all about his time at film school and his time teaching art at the all-girls camp, but obviously failed to mention his time in prison. Apparently he kept pestering Ellen to go on lunch date with him, and she was too nice to refuse. In 1978, Alcala managed to get a job as a typesetter at the Los Angeles Times, using his real name despite his previous criminal convictions. During this time, Alcala convinced hundreds of men and women, a lot of them young, underage men and women, to pose for him as he posed as a professional fashion photographer. Hundreds and hundreds of these images were found, many with young teenage boys posing naked, and these are now being used to try and identify some of his potential victims. Obviously, we know that Alcala had admitted from 50 up to 100 murders, but these are just the confirmed murders. In November 1977, Alcala raped, sodomized and murdered 18-year-old Jill Barkham. She had been found with 3 bite marks on her left breast and had been strangled with her own belt and pant leg. She was found posed on November 10th with her face in the dirt, on her knees, in the foothills near Hollywood. DNA would later link Alcala to the crime in 2005. In November 1977, Alcala raped, sodomized and murdered 27-year-old nurse Georgia Wixt. He used a hammer to sexually abuse her and then beat her head in with the hammer. He then strangled her with either nylon or cord, and he posed her body in her Malibu apartment. And this is a trend that you'll see in all of his murders. He posed most of his victims afterwards, complete disregard to any of their lives. She was found in December 1977, and the hammer was next to her body. His third known victim was 33-year-old legal secretary Charlotte Lamb, She had been strangled with a shoelace from her own shoes and found posed in the laundry room at the El Aguando apartment complex. She was found on June 24th, 1979. Jill Parento was murdered and raped in her own Burbank apartment. She was only 21 years old. She had been strangled using a cord or nylon. Alcala's blood was actually found through a window, which is thought he attempted to escape, and this linked him to the crime years later. It would be his youngest known victim that would find him caught and brought to justice, but not without a fight. On June 20th, 1979, Robin Samso and her friend Bridget were approached by Alcala, who asked them to do a photo shoot. Now, different sources say different things, so one source says that they agreed to the photo shoot until a neighbour stepped in and stopped the photo shoot from happening. However, another source says that the girls disagreed to do the photo shoot. I'm more inclined to believe that the girls declined the photo shoot. I don't think that they would have taken it. However, it was when Robin was on her way to biking to ballet later that day, that she would be abducted and murdered. The poor girl's body, whose bones were animal ravaged, would be found 12 days later by a park ranger. Robin's friend Bridget helped the police to produce a composite sketch, and it was Alcala's former parole officer that recognised him as the suspect. As well as this, in a storage unit that he owned, they found Robin's earrings along with a bag of what are believed to be other potential victims' belongings. Unfortunately, the victim's family would have to endure a long, drawn-out legal process for justice, and this is where it starts to get really frustrating and a little bit bonkers, so again, bear with me. In 1980, a jury found Alcala guilty of murder and sentenced him to death. However, this was turned over by a California Supreme Court, who said the jury were being prejudiced by Alcala's previous sexual convictions. Now, I'm not sure how the legal system works in the US, so if anyone knows about that, let me know in the comments, but I know in the UK that juries aren't allowed to know about past convictions because it might prejudice them to come up with a guilty verdict. So I'm not sure how that works, but if someone could let me know in the comments, that would be great. At the second trial in 1986, Alcala was again found guilty and sentenced to murder. However, a Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals overturned this decision in 2001, as LA Weekly reported, partly because a judge didn't allow a witness for the prosecution to prove that the police had hypnotised the park ranger into saying that he found her animal ravaged bones, which is just absolutely ridiculous. But it's now believed that this was just because of the prejudice towards sexual assault victims. Until 2010, that a third trial was held. 2010. During his time incarcerated, Alcala self-published a book called You, the Jury, in which he proclaimed his innocence. He also made 2 complaints to the penal system. One was for a slip and fall accident, and one was because the prison wouldn't provide him with a low-fat diet. And in a Ted Bundy-esque manner, Alcala announced and shocked everybody when he said he was going to act as his own attorney for the third trial. Before we talk about the third trial, I genuinely believe that this was because he knew that he wasn't going to get away with this. He wanted one last show. He wanted one last big media storm around him because he knew that he was going to be convicted and sent to death this time round. It gets really bizarre from here, so Alcala, acting as his own attorney, put on a deep voice, addressed as himself as Mr. Alcala, and asked himself questions, and then Alcala would reply in his normal voice. This would go on for 5 hours. He told the jury he was at Knott's Berry Farm during Robin's murder, played dumb to the other accusations, and then his closing argument was a song by Arlo Guthrie, Alice's Restaurant.
I went up there, I said, shrink, I wanna kill. I wanna kill. I wanna see blood, gore, and guts and veins in my teeth. Eat dead, burnt bodies.
And that was his closing argument. So I genuinely just believe he knew he just wanted to put on one last show, which is just so sick and so sadistic considering that the victim's family was there. So he claimed to not know or remember killing the other women, and defending a psychologist said that because of his mental health problems he may be having memory lapse. But still, a jury found him guilty and sentenced him to death. Police have since released 120 of the images that Alcala took of the young men and women and the boys and girls in hopes of identifying some more of his potential victims. He's since been linked via DNA to the murder of TWA flight attendant Michael Crilly. He is currently serving his sentence at San Quentin Death Row, and it's believed that he has killed many, many more people, and police are still looking to this day into some of the potential murders that he could have committed. Like I say, this case was really frustrating. Who knows if most of these murders after his original conviction could have been prevented if he hadn't have been allowed to travel, if he hadn't have been allowed to go off and do all this sort of stuff after his second parole. Thank you for watching today's video. I hope you found it informative. Please let me know what you think of this case in the comments below. And please like and subscribe and hit that notification bell, because I'll be back next week with another true crime video. Bye guys.